Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today's webinar on the 2021 Clean Energy Industry Report. I'm Rudy Sturck, Associate Director of Marketing at the Connecticut Green Bank, and your host for today's session. A couple of housekeeping things first. During the session, we are going to share the findings of the second annual report, Tracking Clean Energy Employment in Connecticut. This report was commissioned by the Joint Committee. We hired BW Research Partnership to produce this report, as well as the 2020 report. Financial support was provided by the Connecticut Green Bank, Eversource, and Avangrid subsidiaries, UI, SCG, and CNG. If you haven't done so already, you can access and download the report from the link that is on the slide in front of you. So we will walk through the findings of the report, including the COVID-19 pandemic impact on the state. And then we'll go and talk a little bit about continued industry support from the state's administration, and we will wrap up with a Q&A session. So please enter your questions throughout the presentation, and we will get to them at the end. So without further ado, let me introduce today's presenters. First, we'll have Brenda Watson, Chair of the Joint Committee and Executive Director of Operation Fuel, followed by Philip Jordan, who's the Vice President and Principal Researcher for BW Research, Victoria Hackett, Deputy Commissioner of Energy at the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and then Niall Dammando, Chief of Staff of the Office of Workforce Strategy. So now I will turn it over to Brenda Watson.
Thank you, Rudy. Good morning, everyone. Well, actually, good afternoon. Again, my name is Brenda Watson. I'm the Executive Director of Operation Fuel, and it is my pleasure to chair the Joint Energy Efficiency Board and Green Bank Subcommittee. I'll start to refer to the Energy Efficiency Board as the EEB. The purpose of this joint committee is to examine opportunities, to coordinate programs and activities, and to create financing offerings to increase the benefit of the conservation and load management programs to all sectors and populations in Connecticut, ensuring for a positive customer experience. The joint committee meets quarterly, and we invite you to attend the next meeting scheduled for March 23rd at 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. And I'm sure that Rudy will drop the meeting link in the chat. Next slide, please. It is also my pleasure to share this work with fellow board members, Vicki Hackett, Bureau Chief of the Energy and Technology Policy at DEEP, and Vice Chair of the Joint Committee, John Viglione, economist with the Office of Consumer Counsel, and John Harity, Chair of the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs, along with staff members including, but not limited to, Steve Bruno from Eversource, Joel Kopelek from Avangrid, and Brian Garcia, President and CEO of the Connecticut Green Bank. Next slide. So the administration of Governor Ned Lamont, the Connecticut Green Bank, the EEB, utility companies who administer the energy efficiency funds, and other local, state, and federal authorities work closely with the clean energy developers and contractors to lessen the impacts of the pandemic on the clean energy industry. In 2021, the clean energy firms and their workers were able to create energy savings equivalent to a 122 megawatt power plant with 186,000 tons of CO2 emissions avoided, which is a $5.2 million, actually avoided, which is $5.2 million in public health costs saved. They created $72 million in Connecticut tax revenues. They helped nearly 70,000 households and businesses implement money and energy saving measures that helps ease the energy burden on households and those businesses. The number also includes more than 25,000 participants in the Home Energy Solutions Income Eligible Program and 170 small business projects in distressed communities. The impact of the pandemic has been significant. We've experienced disruptions in the global supply chain. We saw an increase of cost of materials. We lost a workforce that we are trying to rebuild, but the recovery is ongoing, and Connecticut has held its spot at the forefront of the industry. Our clean energy economy was more resilient than other states in the region and in the nation overall, largely due to our established and newly formed partnerships and collaborations among many diverse parties. What we saw and continue to see is a commitment to equity across the energy sector. And where diversity among Black, Latino, and women workers in the sector is lagging, I'm looking forward to a continued conversation to address and fill the equity gaps. And as we begin to lay out a plan for next year's study with BW Research, hoping that we center equity as a key principle of the report. I'll now turn it over to Phil from BW Research. Take it away, Phil.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about this important 2021 Clean Energy Industry Report. I'm actually just going to talk briefly about the overall effort and sort of how we go about collecting the data, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Lehmann, who's the project manager on this project, to walk through the specific findings. So as mentioned, the 2021 report is our second annual report. It's based on the U.S. Energy Employment Report data series. So this series goes back to 2015, when the U.S. Department of Energy commissioned the first U.S. Energy Employment Report nationwide to track changes in energy employment across the entire supply chain across the entire country. So it's an enormous effort that includes anywhere from 25 to 35,000 business surveys each year that then filter some of the data that's available already from our Bureau of Labor Statistics and state departments of labor. So it's a very big effort that has been going on for a number of years. Congress has mandated and authorized and appropriated funds for the Department of Energy to continue this effort. And the Department of Energy in Washington is working very closely with the states to make sure that the data are provided in a format that allows states to be able to customize them for their own specific needs as states set their policies for economic development, workforce development, and climate policy. So we're really excited to be working with Connecticut again this year. I think I'll throw out a plug to say that while I live in Massachusetts, I am a UConn grad and a very proud one at that. So really excited to be working in Connecticut again, and excited about the findings in this report and for the continued commitment to be working with you, because I think there's a lot of exciting things from offshore wind through building efficiency and many others in between that will be really demonstrating the potential for Connecticut to lead in clean energy. So I think with that, as we get into the 2021 highlights, I will turn it over to my colleague Sarah Lehmann, who is a project manager in our Carlsbad, California office, and has really leads a lot of our efforts in the clean energy employment space. So Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Phil. So can you just jump back to the previous slide for a minute, please? Thank you. So before I dive into sort of the more details and specifics of the data that's in the report, I just want to highlight some interesting key findings from this year's analysis. So first, despite sort of, economy-wide job losses that we had mentioned with relation to COVID-19, we actually did see some employment growth in Connecticut's clean energy sector, and more specifically in alternative transportation. So this trend was pretty consistent across both the nation and in other states where we saw growth trends in electric vehicle employment. When comparing sort of the relative declines in the clean energy economy, so as Brenda noted earlier in our kickoff, Connecticut was actually quite resilient by comparison and had among the lowest losses in the nation. So we'll see that in more detail in a couple slides further on. Overall, total firms who are engaged in the alternative transportation space and grid and storage actually increased between 2019 and 2020. And at the same time, we also saw an increase in clean energy contributions to the gross regional product over the same time. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick update on clean energy jobs in the state. As of the last quarter, there were more than 41,000 clean energy workers in Connecticut. And we've seen steady growth from 2015 through 2019 of about 9% over these years. Now the impacts of COVID-19 can be seen in this slide here, which features some job losses in 2020. Altogether, Connecticut lost about 2,600 jobs over 12 months, but employers are optimistic for 2021, expecting to see jobs grow to just above our 2019 levels to nearly about 45,000 workers by the end of this year. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, despite these job losses, Connecticut actually fared quite well and was more resilient when comparing to other state and nationwide averages. So clean energy employment in Connecticut declined by about 6%, which is lower than the statewide average. So across Connecticut, the entire labor market declined by about 7% during this time. The clean energy declines in Connecticut were also lower compared to the nationwide average. So nationally, clean energy jobs declined by about 9%. And then if we look at some other states, we see that Connecticut also lost fewer jobs by comparison compared to Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Next slide, please. So again, despite some of these job losses, clean energy sector contributions to the statewide economy did increase slightly between 2019 and 2020. So the increase was quite small, about 2%, and it was largely driven by utilities and wholesale trade. So these two industries were the large drivers of that growth between 2019 and 2020. Total gross regional product from the clean energy activity in agriculture, manufacturing, and construction declined slightly between this time. And then overall, the economic contributions come from professional services, manufacturing, and utilities industry. Next slide, please. So construction is the largest value chain segment in Connecticut's clean energy industry. At the end of 2020, there were about 18,500 construction jobs, and then professional services and wholesale trade also account for a sizable portion of clean energy employment in the state. So over the last 12 months during the pandemic, all value chain segments saw a slight decline in jobs of about 4 to 6%. Next slide, please. So if we look at clean energy employment by technology sector, we can see that energy efficiency is by far the largest employer of clean energy workers in the state. This sector accounts for about 8 in 10 clean energy jobs, and then clean energy generation accounts for about 1 in 10 workers. With the exception of alternative transportation, which I had mentioned earlier, actually did see some growth during the pandemic. All other technology sectors saw job declines in 2020. Next slide, please. So with this economic downturn, there were fewer firms, of course, that were actually hiring in 2020, but we did still continue asking our hiring difficulty questions. In 2020, about 8 in 10 employers indicated that they had enough qualified workers to meet their current needs. So of the 17% that indicated they did not, just over half were actually hiring or searching for new applicants to fill vacancies or positions in 2020. And of these clean energy businesses who are currently hiring, about 9 in 10 reported some level of difficulty in finding qualified applicants, which was just slightly above the national average. Next slide, please. So as part of this year's survey effort, we did ask a couple questions on the impacts of COVID-19 to get a better understanding of how the pandemic impacted clean energy businesses. In Connecticut, about 3 in 10 clean energy businesses indicated that they had to either lay off, furlough, or reduce pay, benefits, or hours for their clean energy workforce. And the majority of these, about 55%, were temporary layoffs. And then about a third of businesses reported that they had to furlough their clean energy workers. Next slide, please. And then lastly, we also looked at the use of relief and assistance programs and found that about 2/3 of Connecticut's surveyed clean energy businesses actually did not receive any emergency funds in 2020, and about a third, reported that they received some sort of assistance from a local emergency loan program, and then about 17% reported receiving funding through the Paycheck Protection Program. That about wraps up the presentation on what can be found in the 2021 report. There's some additional data on demographics as well as sort of clean energy employment by specific sub-technologies, so solar versus wind versus HVAC technologies. But with that, I will hand it over to Victoria.
Hi, folks, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. Before I begin, I do want to point out that part of the funding for this report, the part that came through the utilities, was funded by the Conservation and Load Management Fund, or Energize CT, which is a customer-funded program. So DEEP is very focused on clean energy workforce issues. We know that we can't meet our climate goals if we don't have the workforce to support the transition to a clean economy. And in looking at workforce development, we're very focused on ensuring that the benefits of this transition flow to folks who live in areas that have been underserved and overburdened. So I just want to refer to a couple of examples of things that are currently being worked on within the Lehmann administration. This is very much a priority of the governors. So one example is with respect to offshore wind. Governor Lehmann has announced that a multifaceted proposal to strengthen Connecticut's offshore wind industry has been awarded $500,000 in round one planning funds from the American Rescue Plan Act's Build Back Better Regional Challenge through the U.S. Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration. So we're very excited about that. A coalition led by Southeastern Connecticut Enterprise Region and supported by DECD as well as other stakeholders put together the initial proposal and proposed 6 projects to support this emerging sector, including diversifying and expanding the supply chain, providing waterfront industrial sites for development, building a green business park, leveraging a replicable workforce development model, supporting blue tech research development, and bringing innovative new products to production. This has the potential to be transformative for New London and Bridgeport and the state's broader offshore wind ecosystem. Another example of work that DEEP is in particular doing is within the Conservation and Load Management Plan. We are currently engaged in our review of the next 3-year plan, and we are working hard to ensure within that review that there's an alignment with planned spending on workforce development with state goals, but also with opportunities for federal funding that we can sort of leverage funding that we have within the CNLM plan as a match for. And we're also focusing on covering ancillary costs to help bring people into the workforce, such as transportation and childcare. So there's a lot of discussion going on within that planning process on that. We are also working very closely with our friends at DECD and the Office of Workforce Strategy in Connecticut. Niall Dammando is on, and he will be talking about some of the work of the Office of Workforce Strategy. It's been an exciting time working closely and partnering with them, and we're memorialized that relationship has been memorialized through Governor Lamont's Executive Order 21-3, which created the Connecticut Clean Economy Council. That council is charged with identifying opportunities to leverage state and federal funding to scale economic opportunities associated with clean energy, climate, and sustainability investments, and to ensuring Connecticut's workforce is trained to deliver climate and sustainability solutions to support equitable and diverse participation in climate and sustainability economic development opportunities from both diverse employers and diverse job seekers. And we will be forming and are in the process of structuring or thinking about how to structure working groups to address workforce development in specific sectors within the fields of clean energy and sustainability. So stay tuned for more there. You'll be hearing from us soon on implementation of this exciting new initiative from Governor Lamont. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Niall to discuss some of the things that the Office of Workforce Strategy is working on.
Thanks, Vicki. I echo all of the excitement and energy around workforce development in the administration right now. Just a little bit of background before I dive into the slides on our office, because we are relatively new. We are the staff to the Governor's Workforce Council, who is the state workforce board in Connecticut. This has been totally revamped under Governor Lamont's leadership. All new employers, a fully released and published strategic plan for workforce that came out last October that really sets sort of the mission and vision for workforce across the state. Our office was codified during the 2021 legislative session. As was alluded to earlier, I'm the chief of staff. Kelly Valeries is the newly appointed chief workforce officer. And our role as an office is really to ensure that workforce development programs are being coordinated across the state, and that we are, especially now more than ever, trying to help people get back to work in high quality careers. So with that being said, we were issued $70 million from the last legislative session in American Rescue Plan funds. And with that, we've developed Career Connect. And I will ask to go to the next slide, and that I think will be a majority of our presentation today, but I'm happy to take any questions during or after. But Career Connect, in a nutshell, is part of a multi-phase plan from our office on sort of revamping our workforce system in Connecticut that not only gets people back to work as quickly as possible to mitigate the unemployment situation that has gotten significantly better under our administration, but has also we still have a ways to go, but also lay the groundwork for a more effective and long-term high-performing workforce system. So the focus for the first phase of our investment of Career Connect, which is the $70 million that I mentioned, is really to promote short-term workforce training programs that are aligned to in-demand careers. I'll get into what those careers are that we are incentivizing, but spoiler alert, as Vicki mentioned, one of them is all around the clean economy, clean energy, climate resilience, and energy efficiency, those types of careers. That is a significant investment portion of our portfolio, and we are sort of thrilled to partner with everyone here and deep on work determining how those dollars are going to get spent. But the focus of the grants are really around promoting best practices in workforce development. And what you see on the slide here are some of the features that we are looking for in terms of funding a program. So ensuring that any job that the training program is aligned to has an employer demand and ideally employer commitments on the front end. What we want to avoid is this typical train and pray model where someone goes through a training program, they earn a certificate, but there was no commitments from an employer, and then they're kind of back at square one. Our goal is to be very intentional about the audience that we serve here and the participants that go through these programs. Our goal as an office and as an administration is to ensure that we're serving underrepresented communities and populations with these funds. So any training program that would receive funding from our office, that is sort of first and foremost one of the most important qualifiers for individuals who would, ultimately be going through these programs. We try to provide sort of full wraparound services. So ensuring that an individual has access to a case manager, that they have full, child care support, transportation support, etc. We're really focused on making sure that people are supported throughout the program so that they ultimately complete it and they don't drop out because of a lack of direction, a lack of resources, etc. So this, like I mentioned before, this is sort of phase one of our portfolio. We will be administering additional dollars coming from different sources. We have a $40 million state bonding authorization, and we are also in the midst of applying for a large federal grant from the EDA. And so we are hopeful that there are other funding sources coming down the pike where, again, clean energy will absolutely be prioritized from our office. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Career Connect, it's really focused on serving underrepresented and historically marginalized populations. Given that this is American Rescue Plan funding, the individuals that would be served, we have to have evidence that they have been impacted by the pandemic in some way, which as we know, is likely not a difficult narrative to thread, given that everyone has been impacted. But I just wanted to call that out, given the federal stipulations. As I mentioned, this is a $70 million proposal. We've had to fund different initiatives out of that 70 million, so it's come down to about 63 million for grants. They are no more than 3 years for regional applications. So by regional, what we mean is there are 5 federally designated workforce development regions in Connecticut. So the Southwest, like the Stamford, Norwalk, Bridgeport area, New Haven, the South Central, the New Haven region, the East region, kind of the shoreline east, the North Central, so Greater Hartford area, and then the Northwest, so Waterbury sort of and above. If a proposal is submitted on this, we with one region, or I should say anything less than 5 regions, we are considering that a singular region proposal, and awards would be up to $3 million. We are really trying to incentivize collaboration across the state here, ensuring that businesses are engaged from multiple corridors, partner organizations are identified, and really trying to use this as a carrot for collaboration. So if all of the 5 regions are engaged, whether from different businesses, different organizations, et cetera, we've sort of left that up to the discretion of the applicant. You are eligible for a longer grant period of up to 4 years and $18 million worth of funding. So again, really trying to foster statewide collaboration and ensure that our partners, we are systems building while also rolling out immediate relief funding. Next slide, please. So this is sort of our anticipated breakdown of the funding. As you could see, infrastructure and clean energy represents about 1/5 of the overall pool of funding. We have other industries that we need to care for here, but just to reiterate, this is again a 3 to 4 year program. So that 1,367 number that you see for clean energy is over that time frame. And we have this sort of flexible pool of funds, this other category, should need arise that exceeds the current allotment that's been apportioned to those specific industries. And this is not on the slide, but that 1,300 number equates to about 14 million in funding going to this industry. So that's sort of our overall investment size for this industry. So like I mentioned before, we're taking a comprehensive lens in terms of what we consider clean energy and infrastructure here. Vicky mentioned a few of the focus areas as part of our collaboration: solar energy, wind energy, and energy efficiency, resilience, transportation, more cleaner transportation models. So we are trying to take a pretty comprehensive view in terms of what proposals and training programs would be supported. In addition, these funds can be used to stand up new training programs. So as we're considering pretty nascent industries like offshore wind, for example, this funding pool can certainly be used to support net new programs and not just supporting existing programs. So program development is absolutely a permissible expense. As I mentioned before, but just to reiterate, because it is sort of the foundation for our proposal, our intent really is to fund marginalized and underrepresented populations. So we've called out a few on the slide here that are not exhaustive by any means, but have been a traditional focus for our office, and that's the BIPOC communities, the people with disabilities, individuals re-entering from incarceration, opportunity youth, which we define as out of work and out of school, and typically someone between the ages of 18 and 26, and veterans. So again, that's not exhaustive. We know there's a lot more demographics that could fall under the underrepresented list. And there's intersectionality between those different demographics. So we are very, just very focused on making sure that any proposal that we fund touches these different populations in some way. Next slide, please. So just quickly on eligibility and allowable uses. So there are 3 eligible applicants for this grant: a regional workforce development board, a community-based or nonprofit organization, or a single or consortia of institutions of higher education. You'll see a number of additional partners mentioned below, employers, local governments, K-12 school districts, state agency partners. These are all eligible recipients of the funding. As a employer, you stand to benefit tremendously from a fully subsidized job training program. However, what we're encouraging is for the lead applicant, so the person who's going to receive the funds initially will be one of those 3 organizations that I mentioned, and that all of those additional partners collaborate and identify among themselves additional organizations to work with on submitting an application. So for example, if you're a company, we would highly encourage that you reach out to organizations in the community, again, a regional workforce development board in your region or a regional higher ed institution, to work on developing a job training program, or obviously if there's one that exists, take that and use them to submit the application. But obviously the funding would go to the job training program, and then the people would ideally flow into the organization. So again, the goal here is to foster collaboration on the front end and build partnerships where they might not already exist. And we're really focused on ensuring that the right relationships are built on the front end, rather than ensuring that people are going at this in isolation, where services might already be provided in a region and people are trying to duplicate services simply because they don't know they exist. So just on the right-hand side are eligible uses. For the most part, these are all, anything program related is an eligible use. So provision of supportive services, training tuition, cost of instructors, data collection, marketing, recruitment, et cetera. Those are all permissible. What's not permissible are, building new technology systems, funding, policy or research initiatives, capital expenditures like building out or, building out new space or a facility. Obviously, training equipment is an eligible use, but there's a sort of a fine line in terms of how much is going on the CapEx side. And then, as you can see, some other smaller in the bottom right-hand corner are things that just aren't eligible uses. Next slide, please. So finally, in terms of kind of process and timing, we are by no means just expecting everyone to understand exactly the intent behind this program and go off to the races. So we have a technical assistance team that's run out of our office that their one and only purpose is to serve applicants and make sure that their questions are being answered. So please reach out to them. We have a website that I can share with this group that has a sign up portal where you can sign up for sort of office hours with our technical assistance team, where they can answer any questions that you have about, if I'm a company, how do I get in touch with an eligible applicant, for example, or things of that nature. So I highly encourage that anyone on this call who is interested in this, that they use our technical assistance team. The review team is just, again, the folks who are going to be reviewing the applications and making funding decisions. And then finally, one of the most important pieces is timing here. What we're doing is the first applications are due February 20th. So I know that is not a lot of time, but there are other application periods that will be released later in the year. So August is going to be our next application period. And then we will reoccur those and repeat those cadences until our funding has been fully drawn out. So again, I would encourage, if this is something that would benefit folks on the line, I would encourage reaching out to our technical assistance team so that we can get you either plugged into an existing application that is already being worked on, or we can get you plugged into the right folks to draw up a new application. Finally, just the last thing I would add is once an application is submitted in February, there will be a review period. So if we, for example, if there's an application that is very close on the meeting some of the criteria, we can say, we are not funding this just yet, but we would like to go and work with you to answer a few questions. So we're trying to provide as much flexibility for organizations so they don't have to wait until August to resubmit, but really rather work with them to ensure their application gets submitted in the first phase, given how we very much know there's a crisis right now that we need to work through. So I think that's the last slide, but I'm happy to answer any questions or happy to field questions offline via email as well. But thank you again for the opportunity to socialize this with you, and looking forward to working with you all going forward in the future.
Thank you, Niall. Thank you, Vicki, and thank you, Sarah. It was a terrific presentation. So we will open the floor now for questions from the audience. We did have a question come in during the session. It was a question about equity and diversity in Connecticut, the clean energy industry, and other states. And if there are thoughts from others, Brenda, if you want to jump in, or Sarah, Vicki, the question is about what are other states doing to help bridge that gap and to become more diverse and in the workforce?
I do not have an answer to that. It's actually a sector that I am just actually learning more about. Operation Fuel, in partnership with the Second Chance Education Alliance, hosted a re-entry webinar last week to discuss these issues. There are some good examples. Actually, there's one good example that I can talk about in Vermont. It's a program called Vermont Women Works. It's within a correctional facility, and the women who enroll in the program are able to get hands-on experience with learning how to do weatherization and some of the deeper dive retrofits with ensuring that mobile homes are energy efficient. They have a very high retention rate, or I should say employment rate. I believe the percentage for eligible women who are discharged from the correctional facility is at 85 to 90% employment, and a very low compared to other women who are discharged recidivism percentage, which is at 19% compared to 50% for women who do not go through that training program. So I think more models like this and the Career Connecticut or Connect CT program, which I just learned about today, I think the more that we continue to bridge the resources and talk about this as an issue, working with the utility companies and other state leaders like folks at Deep, Vicky, and the Green Bank, I think we can create a roadmap as to how folks can enter into this sector and help solve this issue of not only diversifying the workforce, but also building a new generation of environmental stewards who are very likely returning to, in terms of reentry folks, who are very likely returning to frontline communities once they are discharged. So happy to learn more about this particular topic and connect with Niall.
I would also just jump in and mention some of the other work more broadly that our office is doing that intersects, I think, with some of these themes. We've actually developed a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee on our Governor's Workforce Council that has 5 sort of subgroups in it, 5 working groups, one of which is focused on the reentry population. So the 5 working groups are BIPOC, opportunity youth, people with disabilities, reentering individuals, and veterans. And each of those working groups has been staffed with community-based organization leaders, higher education partners, businesses. The committee has grown to over 70 people, I think. So I'm happy to get anyone on the phone here looped into some of those working groups because again, there's not a specific climate focus there, but their goal is to develop strategies, recommendations, priorities that really increase the workforce participation among those underrepresented groups. It is really foundational to the work that we're doing to get this right. And we've really relied on the experts of the people on the ground who are working with those individuals in the communities to tell us what really is the best way to help and what services and supports they need. So I'm happy to share more information about that work if that would be helpful to the folks on the line.
I'd also add that we are, there's a lot of exciting work going on in this regard, as Niall said, at the Office of Workforce Strategy within the context of the Conservation and Load Management Fund and energy efficiency and HVAC workers. We are, again, in the review of our 3-year plan right now, and part of that review is looking at best practices throughout the nation. And there are a lot of really exciting programs right now that are really focused on community-based approaches to decarbonization. And so we're absolutely using lessons learned and models from other states and looking at how we're doing things. And I know that the utility program administrators have grown their workforce development teams, and we have a significant focus on that within our staff at BETP as well.
Great, thank you all for that answer. That's very helpful. We did have a question come in about sort of a broader scope view of things. If a version of the federal Build Back Better plan passes and includes some element of a civilian climate corps or something related, what kind of possible impact would you see that having upon Connecticut? Pure speculation question, but.
I mean, I'll just jump in and say I think that would be tremendously exciting. We need all the help we can get, right? And right now we're figuring out how to sort of start implementing the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, and we're very focused on that. And if Build Back Better comes along, that's going to provide a lot of additional benefits and opportunities that we'll be able to leverage here in Connecticut. And the Lehmann administration is very focused on how getting us staffed up and ready to leverage those benefits.
Excellent, thank you. So this is last call for questions, folks. If you have any questions, put them in the box. But otherwise, panelists, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with our audience before we conclude?
I'd just like to say thank you to the joint subcommittee of the Energy Efficiency Board and the Green Bank and BW Research for putting out a really excellent report. I've been utilizing some of the stats from it in my own work, and I am excited about reading next year's report to help identify not only bridging some of these diversity gaps, but to learn about just the impact that this sector is having on our communities in general.
Just want to totally agree with Brenda. You know, this work is incredibly important. We can't reach our decarbonization goals if we don't have the workers to get us there. And just really excited about what the next few years is going to bring as we all coordinate to leverage the opportunities that are coming our way.
Great. Well, again, thank you to our panelists today. Thank you for everyone who attended. We will be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the recording and some other materials that y'all might find interesting. So again, thanks to the panelists. Thank you all for attending. That will wrap up our section for today.
Thank you, Rudy.
Thanks, Rudy. Thanks, everybody, for attending.
Thanks, everyone.